When a dedicated teacher discovered a forgotten journal on a worn wooden desk, her heart pounded with anticipation. She turned its pages with trembling fingers, and the words she found inside sent chills coursing through her entire body. At first glance, the student who owned the journal had seemed perfectly ordinary, just a quiet boy who often sat in the second row. But what she read there exposed a sinister truth beneath the surface, a truth that threatened to destroy more than one life if left ignored. If you're tuning in from wherever you call home, let us know in the comments below. And if you believe that no secret should remain hidden, that the truth should always see the light of day, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of courage and justice. Now, let's delve into a tale of betrayal, resilience, and the relentless fight for what's right. Laura Turner, a 6th grade English teacher at Walnut Creek Elementary, had always been an early riser. Every weekday, she arrived at her classroom before anyone else. She would slide the key into the lock, ease the door open, and let the morning sun spill across the rows of neatly arranged desks. The smell of chalk dust and old books carried a certain comfort for her. It reminded her of all the days she spent as a shy child, finding solace in stories and daydreaming of becoming the kind of teacher who could see each student's worth. For Laura, the classroom was sacred ground, a place where she believed change could happen, where young minds found their voices. Yet in the early hours of Tuesday, a current of unease invaded her usually tranquil sanctuary. She felt it even before she noticed the brown, dog-eared journal lying on top of a desk in the second row. It did not belong there. The students knew to stow their personal items in their cubbies. So, she walked over, her footsteps echoing across the tile floor, and she touched the battered cover. Her fingertips detected a slight indentation, as if the writer had pressed the pen too hard against the pages. Her own heart pressed with worry. She recognized the messy scrawl of the name on the front, Liam Brooks. He was one of her brightest students, known for his exceptional writing and creativity. Lately, though, he had grown quieter, often appearing exhausted or preoccupied, as if something gnawed at him from the inside. The previous week, he had begun to slip, missing homework, trailing behind in class, wincing whenever she called on him to read aloud. The boy who once proudly volunteered to share his short stories now seemed petrified of attention. Laura remembered noticing bruises on his arm, faint but unmistakable, and the haunted look in his eyes. She had asked him about the bruises once. He shrugged and mumbled something about falling off his bike. She did not entirely believe him, but she found no immediate reason to doubt him. Now, with the journal in her hands, she felt a pang of guilt. She had missed the warnings before, once, years ago, with a student who needed her help but never got it in time. Hesitation gnawed at her. School policy was very strict about student privacy, and reading a personal journal was absolutely forbidden without cause. But that memory of a student lost, a child named Allison whom she failed to save, loomed large in her mind. With trembling hands, she flipped open the cover, drawn by a sense of dreadful urgency. And the words leaped out at her. "I am not safe." They were scrawled in large, frantic letters, repeated over and over as if the writer's desperation had reached a fever pitch. Her chest tightened, and her eyes scanned the lines with growing horror. On the next page, she found something even more alarming. "If I don't come to school tomorrow, find my body in the basement." Her breath caught in her throat. The letters were shaky, the sentences chilling. A sinister jolt coursed through her. Was this a desperate plea for attention? A cry for help from a child in serious danger? She remembered Liam's exhausted expressions and realized, with cold clarity, that this was no idle threat. There were details here, shadows around the words, that suggested a real, imminent crisis. She set the journal down for a moment, her hands quivering. She knew that calling the authorities was the only choice, even if it meant risking her job. And so, ignoring the surge of anxiety in her gut, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher's voice came through, steady and professional, Laura explained the situation with as much composure as she could muster. She read aloud Liam's words, her voice trembling. The dispatcher assured her that an officer would come by the school to speak to her in person. After hanging up, Laura slumped into her chair, breathing heavily. She looked at the fading pencil scrawls on the chalkboard, yesterday's lesson about narrative arcs, ironically enough, and prayed she was not too late. As the minutes crawled by, Laura found herself rifling through old memories of the day she had discovered Allison's name in a suicide note. She remembered the hollow pit in her stomach when she realized she had missed the signs in that case. Allison had never shown the typical outward signals of despair or self-harm, no dramatic changes, no obvious calls for help, but there had been subtleties Laura later recognized in hindsight. And she promised herself, on the day of Allison's funeral, that she would never ignore a child's cry for help again, no matter how faint or ambiguous. An hour later, 2 officers walked into her classroom. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a serious expression. The other, shorter and slightly less intimidating, seemed more inquisitive. The tall one introduced himself as Officer Ben Daniels, while his partner remained quiet. Officer Daniels' brown eyes flicked around the classroom, taking in the neat row of desks, the colorful reading posters taped to the walls, and the anxious look on Laura's face. She handed over Liam's journal, and he thumbed through it. When he finally looked back at her, his expression had shifted from mild skepticism to alarmed concern. "Ma'am, do you know where Liam Brooks lives?" he asked. Laura nodded. "He's part of our free lunch program, so the address is on file." "I'm worried. I've seen some bruises on him. He seemed scared lately." Officer Daniels' partner frowned. "We need to check on him right away." Laura provided the address, and the officers took it down. She wanted to go with them, to see Liam and ensure he was safe, but she could almost read their body language, the protective stance, the efficient manner. This was their job, not hers. She thought of how she might help from here. Perhaps, she told herself, it was enough that she had called. That was the protocol. She had done the right thing, the only thing she could do. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hovered inside her. After the officers left, the school day began. Students filtered into the classroom, giggling, dropping backpacks next to their seats. Liam's desk remained conspicuously empty. Laura tried her best to greet everyone with a warm smile, as she always did, but fear quaked under her skin. She caught herself glancing at the door every few minutes, half expecting Liam to slip in late, half fearing he never would. When the bell rang, she tried to focus on the lesson, but her voice felt thick. Her mind remained on that terrifying note: "If I don't come to school tomorrow, find my body in the basement." She tried to keep calm for the other kids. If they noticed her trembling hands or the slight quiver in her voice, none of them mentioned it. Still, her thoughts drifted constantly to what might be happening just a few miles away. Hours passed before she heard from Officer Daniels again. The ring of her classroom phone jolted her out of a discussion on metaphors and similes. She excused herself from the students to pick it up. It was the front office, telling her that an Officer Daniels was waiting to speak with her outside. Heart pounding, she asked for a moment, then told her class to read silently. She stepped into the hallway, where Officer Daniels stood, looking more troubled than before. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice low. "We found Liam. He was in the basement, locked in. He's safe for now, though. His stepfather has been arrested on suspicion of aggravated assault and unlawful restraint." Laura felt relief crash over her like a tidal wave, only to be followed by a sickening fear when she heard the words, "for now." "Is Liam hurt?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's shaken up. He had some bruises, rope marks on his wrists. We believe he was bound, maybe for just a short while, but it looked like it was going to get worse. Our early reports suggest the stepfather was preparing to—" Officer Daniels paused, struggling to phrase something so disturbing delicately. "We think your actions likely saved his life." Tears pricked at Laura's eyes. She swallowed back a wave of emotion and nodded. It took her a moment to gather herself. Officer Daniels placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, then pulled it back, remembering to maintain a professional distance. "We'll need a statement from you," he said. "And probably the journal too. This will be evidence if the district attorney decides to press charges. Can we count on your cooperation?" "Of course," she whispered. "Anything to help Liam." Officer Daniels nodded. "Thank you. You did the right thing. We'll be in touch." He left, And Laura stayed in the hallway a moment longer, leaning against the wall, letting relief and horror swirl inside her. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer. Liam was alive. He was safe for now. But what about tomorrow, the day after that? She knew from experience that just because a child was rescued from immediate danger did not guarantee an end to the nightmare. The system was complicated. The abuser would face legal consequences, but that was just the beginning. Liam would need therapy, support, and a new living situation if his mother was unable to protect him. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, she straightened her blouse and told herself to hold it together. Her students were waiting in the classroom, oblivious to the drama unfolding. She needed to finish her lesson for them, or at least pretend she could. The news spread quickly through Walnut Creek Elementary. Teachers whispered about it in the staff lounge. Parents called the front office to ask questions. But no one had the full story yet, just rumors that a child had been rescued from a horrific situation at home. Laura faced the principal, Mr. Jenkins, that very afternoon. He called her into his office and shut the door behind them. "I've heard some disturbing things, Laura," he began, folding his hands on top of his desk. "Did you call the police because of something you read in a student's journal?" Her stomach tightened. "Yes," she said, hoping to exude calm. "I found a distressing entry in Liam Brooks's journal, so I contacted 911. I realize I broke protocol by looking at it without permission, but—" "This is serious," he interjected. "You know we have privacy guidelines in place to protect the students as well as the school. We need to respect personal boundaries. The parents could sue." "I understand. But there was a credible threat. Liam wrote that he feared for his life. I couldn't just ignore that." She stared back at him, refusing to let him make her feel smaller. "I'm sorry I broke the rules. But I don't regret it." Mr. Jenkins sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Laura, you're one of my best teachers. I don't want to lose you over this. But there's going to be an investigation by the school board. Greg Brooks is in custody, but we don't know the full story yet, and the district is worried about liability. You'll need to meet with the school's legal counsel, and there may be a suspension or some kind of disciplinary measure. I need you to be prepared." She nodded numbly. A swirl of emotions churned inside her: anger, sadness, frustration. How could they chastise her for trying to save a child's life? But she forced herself to remain composed. "I'll cooperate with whatever they need," she said quietly, stepping out of Mr. Jenkins's office with a heavy heart. That night, after she returned home to her small, cozy apartment, she tried to focus on her usual routine. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea, fixed a simple pasta dinner, and curled up on the couch. Yet the mundane tasks offered no comfort. Her mind kept returning to Liam, his frightened eyes, that ominous journal entry, the knowledge that had she not called the police, the boy might have become another tragedy. With every sip of tea, she tasted her own fear and guilt. She couldn't get rid of a single haunting question. Would the school punish her for saving his life? Memories of Allison flooded back again. Allison, who had exhibited quiet distress signals that Laura missed until it was too late. Back then, she had been a younger teacher, uncertain of how to handle the swirl of emotions in her classroom. The guilt had lingered, shaping her entire teaching philosophy afterward. She learned to look closer, to pry a little more gently, and to never ignore a child's subtle pleas. She promised herself never again, but all those promises came with a hefty price. The burden of carrying this deeply could be crippling. However, if her experience could rescue even one child, it was worth every sleepless night. The next morning, she received another call from Officer Daniels, who informed her that Liam was currently undergoing medical treatment and being placed under the protective care of Child Services. He would be out of school for at least a week, maybe longer, while the legal process unfolded. Laura's chest tightened at the thought of him navigating sterile hospital halls, therapists' offices, and uncertain living arrangements. But at least he was alive. That was something. In the days that followed, Laura continued teaching. She tried to act normal, but she sensed the hush that fell among her colleagues whenever she entered the staff lounge. She knew they were talking about her, about Liam, about the complicated morality of what she had done. Some praised her bravery. Others whispered that she should have followed the protocol more carefully, that she had risked losing her job. She caught fragments of conversation. She did the right thing. Who cares about protocol when a kid's in danger? But the parents could sue. The stepfather might have a good lawyer. You never know. She tried to tune it all out and focus on her students. She reminded herself that her choice had saved Liam's life. Nothing else mattered. Yet every mention of an investigation or a lawsuit sent a cold spike of anxiety through her. She began losing sleep. Her appetite dwindled. The stress weighed her down, tangling with her memories of Allison, stirring up old scars she had never fully healed. A few days later, the tension thickened. The district arranged a formal meeting with Laura. She wore her nicest skirt and blouse, though she felt little comfort in the professional attire. In the narrow conference room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glare on the glossy table. Across from her sat Mr. Jenkins, 2 school board officials, and a stern-faced attorney representing the district. They had manila folders in front of them, presumably containing her file and official statements. "All right, Miss Turner," said one of the board members, adjusting his glasses. "We understand you read the contents of a student's private journal, which is in direct violation of established privacy policies unless you had reason to believe the student was in immediate harm. Could you please describe, in detail, the circumstances that led you to take such action?" So, she told them everything. Her suspicions about Liam's bruises, his withdrawal from class, the journal's presence on his desk, and those harrowing lines she read. She recounted calling the police and the subsequent revelation of abuse at Liam's home. "That's all well and good," interjected the attorney. "But were you certain the message represented a credible threat? Don't middle school children often exaggerate or write dramatic things to get attention? You claim to have seen bruises, but did you notify the school counselor or a child protection hotline before reading the journal?" Laura struggled to remain calm. "I followed my instincts, and it turned out I was right," she said, trying not to sound defensive. "If I had ignored it, we might be discussing a tragedy now instead of a rescue." The attorney made a note. "Understood, but we also have to consider the liability to the district. We have a chain of command for these issues. Teachers are mandatory reporters, yes, but they're supposed to consult the administration or counseling office before directly calling 911 unless there's an emergency in progress. We need clarity on whether or not your direct approach was justified." Laura opened her mouth, but Mr. Jenkins intervened. "Look," he said, "there is no question that Miss Turner may have saved Liam's life. We all recognize that. However, we also must address the breach of policy. The district has to protect itself from legal backlash. Greg Brooks was taken into custody, but his lawyer might argue that the journal was read without cause. We have to be able to show that Miss Turner's actions were appropriate." A wave of despair washed over Laura. She felt corners of her mind unraveling, her inner voice screaming. This child was saved from a monster. Isn't that what matters? Yet, outwardly, she remained composed. "I understand," she said quietly. "I would make the same decision again, regardless of the consequences." The meeting ended without a final verdict. They told her they would be in touch with more questions if necessary and that she was to await their decision on whether a formal reprimand, a suspension, or worse might be required. She returned home feeling hollow, her mind spinning with the possibility that she could lose her job. But overshadowing that fear was concern for Liam. She wondered how he was coping, whether he felt safer now that his stepfather was behind bars. Days turned into a week, and Laura functioned on autopilot. She taught with unwavering dedication, trying to keep her anxieties hidden. One afternoon, just as the final bell rang, she saw Anna Brooks, Liam's mother, standing hesitantly at the edge of the school parking lot. The woman looked pale, her posture hunched, as if she was bracing herself against an invisible wind. Laura recognized her from a parent-teacher conference earlier that year. Back then, Anna had seemed nervous and easily flustered, as though she was walking on eggshells. Now, her eyes brimmed with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. "Mrs. Brooks." Laura approached carefully. "Is everything all right? How's Liam?" Anna glanced up. Her voice quivered. "He's getting there. He's with a social worker right now. I just wanted to thank you." I only just found out it was you who called the police. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't believe I never saw how bad things had gotten. Greg, he always kept me in the dark, or told me to mind my own business. I was so scared to confront him. I should have done more to protect my son. You don't have to blame yourself, Laura said gently, though she knew Anna's journey to self-forgiveness would be long. I'm just relieved Liam is alive. Anna swallowed hard. I'm trying to do the right thing now. I've spoken to the detectives. I'm going to testify about Greg's abuse, not just toward Liam but toward me as well. I was ashamed to admit it before. And I don't know if it will help in the legal case, but I'm done hiding. Laura's heart ached for this woman who had existed in the same fear Liam had. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Standing up like that is courageous. Anna nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. If you ever need anything, a statement for the school or... I just want you to know that you saved my son, and I'll do anything I can to help you too. The school is blaming you for reading that journal, right? Laura sighed. It's complicated. The district's worried about lawsuits. They're investigating. I'll speak for you if they ask, Anna said with a shaky breath. I'll tell them you did the right thing. No question. Touched by her sincerity, Laura reached out and gave Anna a gentle hug. In that moment, she felt the quiet strength that can emerge from a mother's love, battered though it might be by years of intimidation and manipulation. She prayed that Anna would remain resolute when faced with cross-examination and threats from Greg's potential legal team. But for now, there was a fragile alliance between teacher and parent, two people determined to keep Liam safe. Over the following weeks, more fragments of Liam's story came to light. Greg Brooks, once seen by neighbors and extended family as a charming, respectable man, had a dark history of violence. Those who knew him casually refused to believe it at first. But as the police dug deeper, old restraining orders and allegations surfaced, painting a portrait of a deeply troubled man. The cycle of abuse he endured in childhood had mutated into a horrifying pattern he now inflicted on his own family. And yet, some within the community still struggled to reconcile the man they greeted in passing with the predator who locked a child in a basement. Mrs. Doris Harper, an elderly neighbor who had lived next to the Brooks family for years, recounted to the police how Greg used to help with her groceries or fix her fence. He was always so polite, she lamented. I'd sometimes hear shouting at night, but he told me Liam had behavior problems, said the boy just needed discipline. Her eyes welled with guilt when she confessed she never questioned it. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Laura's fear mounted. The school board's investigation continued, and lawyers probed every detail. She provided all her notes about Liam, comments on his participation in class, on the day he turned in an essay about fear, on the bruises she spotted. She was questioned about Allison too, since that tragedy was part of her teaching record. It all felt invasive and cold. But she refused to show them any sign of regret. If saving a child cost her the career she loved, then so be it. When Laura finally received word that the board intended to hold a formal hearing, she also discovered that Anna Brooks would attend, along with Mrs. Harper and a few other community members, hoping to support her. It was both comforting and terrifying. A hearing was a serious affair, typically reserved for major disciplinary issues like gross misconduct or moral infractions. On the day of the hearing, Laura wore the same professional outfit she had worn at the earlier meeting, even though she half expected to be told to pack her desk by day's end. The hearing took place in the school's auditorium, which was large enough to hold the small crowd that had gathered, teachers, parents, even some older students who had come to support Laura. She walked in, shoulders tense, her nerves vibrating like a tightly drawn string. At the front sat the school board members behind a long table. On her right, she recognized the district attorney's representative, a stern-faced woman who offered no greeting. On the left, the district's attorney was present, along with Mr. Jenkins, who avoided meeting Laura's eyes. After the necessary introductions, the board members explained the purpose of the hearing, to determine whether Laura had acted in accordance with her obligations as a teacher and mandatory reporter, and whether her breach of protocol was justified or punishable. They would hear testimony, review the evidence, and make a recommendation. Anna Brooks testified first. She recounted Greg's escalating abuse, her fear, and the moment she discovered he had locked Liam in the basement. She described how the police intervened in the nick of time. Through tears, she explained that she had been controlled and manipulated for years, that Greg had threatened to hurt her or Liam if she ever told anyone. She concluded by saying, if Miss Turner hadn't read Liam's journal, he might not be alive. That's the truth. No policy in the world should punish her for saving a life. Then came Mrs. Harper, who shared her experiences with Greg's friendly facade. She admitted the guilt she felt for dismissing the late-night screaming. But Miss Turner acted, Mrs. Harper said, voice unsteady. She made sure that boys' cries for help were heard. Isn't that why she's a teacher? To protect children. After that, Officer Ben Daniels was called forward. He stated plainly, we discovered Liam bound in the basement. Our preliminary findings suggest Greg Brooks planned to do far worse. The timeline Ms. Turner provided us with was crucial in mobilizing a quick response. Without that, we could have been too late. Finally, it was Laura's turn to speak. Her heart hammered. She cleared her throat and faced the board, forcing herself to maintain steady eye contact. I've dedicated my entire career to helping kids, especially the ones who don't have a voice. I made a judgment call when I found Liam's journal. I felt an immediate sense of danger, and Liam's words confirmed it. I am not safe. If I don't come to school tomorrow, find my body in the basement. That wasn't just drama. That was a cry for help. She exhaled slowly. I broke protocol by reading a student's personal journal. I accept responsibility for that. But I firmly believe I did exactly what any caring teacher or adult should do in that situation. One of the board members shifted in his seat. We have no doubts about your intentions, Miss Turner. But the question stands, were they overshadowed by your own emotional baggage from a past incident involving a student you lost? His tone was direct but not unkind. She felt a lump form in her throat as she thought of Allison. Yes, she admitted. I lost a student once, and it changed me. If that tragedy influences me to act more decisively when I see a child in danger, then I'm glad it does. I've had nightmares about what would happen if I missed the signs again. I'm not sorry for being vigilant. A hush fell. For the next half hour, the attorneys asked questions, the board members weighed policies, and Laura answered as best she could. She explained step by step why she did what she did, the moral duty she felt, her mandatory reporter status. Finally, the lead board member called for a brief recess while they deliberated. People in the audience whispered in hushed tones, but Laura felt too exhausted to engage with them. She stared at her trembling hands in her lap until, at last, the board members returned. Their decision was presented matter-of-factly. Laura Turner would receive an official written reprimand for breaching privacy policies, but she would not be suspended or terminated. She would, however, need to complete additional training on mandatory reporting procedures. Relief washed over her, making her lightheaded. She heard a smattering of applause from the small crowd. Anna Brooks ran up and hugged her. Even Mr. Jenkins came by and shook her hand, quietly saying, I'm glad it worked out, Laura. In the wake of the hearing, however, the conflict did not dissipate entirely. Greg Brooks's legal proceedings gained traction, and Laura was subpoenaed to testify. She would have to recount Liam's journal entries in a court of law, effectively making them public record. This brought a new wave of anxiety, because the defense might attempt to twist her actions into an invasion of privacy, painting her as an overzealous teacher. She dreaded the possibility that they would try to discredit her or, worse, psychologically harass Liam by suggesting he had exaggerated his situation. While the legal machine churned, Liam remained under state supervision, living in a safe house with Anna. She had managed to break away from Greg's control, but they were both under close watch in case any relatives sided with Greg or tried to harass them. The boy's bruises had started to heal, though the psychological wounds were deeper. Laura was not allowed to visit him yet, as the process required official boundaries, but Anna sent a note to her classroom one day, letting her know Liam was asking about her. The note read, Liam wants to say thanks. He's nervous about everything, but he said to tell you he'll be back at school one day soon. And that he's sorry if he got you in trouble. He misses you. Laura nearly cried reading that. The mental image of Liam smiling shyly, telling her he missed her, gave her a sense of renewed purpose that overshadowed her lingering fears about the court proceedings. She poured herself into her teaching, determined to keep her head above water even as the tension built. Officer Daniels checked in with her regularly, updating her on the investigation. The more they uncovered about Greg's past, the more horrifying the story became. There were restraining orders filed by old girlfriends, allegations that he had hurt animals as a child, and even rumors that he had spent time in a juvenile facility. Nothing had stuck permanently, though. Greg had a knack for evading accountability. His mother had been a violent alcoholic, and his father was a man nobody seemed to remember clearly. It was a tragic background that showcased the cyclical nature of abuse. Still, while it provided context, it did not absolve Greg of his monstrous actions. Eventually, the trial date loomed. Laura's nerves felt frayed, but she had no choice. She was a key witness to Liam's written cry for help. On the morning of her testimony, she dressed carefully in a subdued navy blouse and a black skirt, wanting to convey respect for the court but also hold her composure. She arrived at the courthouse, a grand gray building that looked intimidating and cold. Officer Daniels met her outside, offered a reassuring nod, and walked her through the security check. They led her into the courtroom, where she sat on a bench with other witnesses. Greg Brooks sat at the defense table, wearing a cheap suit. He looked calm, almost smug, as though he believed his lawyer could work miracles. Laura tried not to stare, focusing instead on the flags flanking the judge's seat. She glanced around, noting the scuffed floors and the solemn hush that pervaded the space. When they finally called her name, she rose on shaky legs and approached the witness stand. After she was sworn in, the prosecutor began asking questions. Laura explained how she discovered Liam's journal, the content of its entries, and why she felt compelled to call the police immediately. She described in detail the changes she had observed in Liam's behavior, the bruises, the withdrawn attitude. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. A thin, wiry man with a clever gleam in his eyes approached, wearing a faint smirk. "Miss Turner," he began, "you freely admit to violating your school's privacy policy by reading my client's stepson's journal. Can you confirm that?" She swallowed. "Yes, I did read the journal." "And you had previously lost a student under tragic circumstances, isn't that correct?" She hesitated. "Yes." "So, would you say your judgment might have been clouded by personal guilt and fear, making you jump to conclusions?" Laura's chest tightened. "I would say my previous experience made me vigilant, not clouded. Liam wrote that he feared for his life. The context of his bruises and behavior supported my conclusion that the threat was real." The defense attorney pressed harder, suggesting that Liam might have been acting out, writing dramatic statements. He implied that there were no prior police reports against Greg, no conclusive evidence beyond the journal, and a few bruises. Laura felt a flicker of anger but forced herself to remain calm. She reiterated the boy's direct quotes, including the threat to his own life if he did not show up to school. She insisted that, in her professional judgment as a teacher, the matter was urgent enough to warrant immediate police intervention. Finally, the questioning ended. Laura stepped down, her heart still racing. She spotted Greg gazing at her with an unsettling calm. She wondered what was going through his mind, whether he was mentally plotting revenge or simply confident in his attorney's skill. More witnesses followed: the social worker, the officers who found Liam, medical professionals who examined him. Liam himself might eventually take the stand, but the prosecutor hoped to spare him that ordeal if they had enough evidence otherwise. Anna testified last, her voice trembling as she recounted the atmosphere of terror Greg created in their home. While she spoke, Greg's composure cracked for a moment. His jaw tightened, and a flash of raw hatred flickered in his eyes. But he said nothing. The trial ran longer than expected. Days turned into over a week. Laura returned to school each day with a swirl of dread in her stomach, uncertain how the verdict would come out. She knew the justice system could be unpredictable, especially if the defense managed to cast doubt. But as the evidence piled up, it looked increasingly damning for Greg. They had photos of Liam's bruises, the rope marks on his wrists, and corroborating testimony from Anna, who revealed how Greg had threatened to kill Liam if he ever told anyone about the abuse. The tension mounted toward the end of the trial. The prosecutor delivered a compelling closing argument, painting Greg Brooks as a manipulative abuser who nearly ended a child's life. The defense tried to muddy the waters, accusing the police of a rushed investigation and pointing fingers at Anna's unreliable mental state. But ultimately, it seemed the jury was not swayed by these tactics. On the final day, Laura slipped into the back of the courtroom to hear the verdict. She watched Liam, who sat next to a court-appointed advocate, looking small and pale, but determined to see this through. The judge read the jury's decision. Greg Brooks was found guilty of multiple counts, including child endangerment, false imprisonment, and assault. Laura's eyes welled with tears as relief coursed through her. She saw Anna clasp Liam's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she silently thanked every force in the universe that the boy had escaped a worse fate. Greg remained stony, but the clench of his jaw revealed his fury. As he was led away, Laura felt a knot of dread unclench in her chest. Justice had been served, at least as much as the legal system could provide. Yet the conflict lingered in other forms. Laura, in her quiet moments, still wrestled with guilt. She knew that Liam's scars, physical and emotional, would not vanish overnight. She also knew that her own life would never be entirely free of the fear that she might miss a sign again. But as the days passed, a sense of resolution began to take root. The school board hearing was behind her, the trial was over, and a path toward healing opened up for Liam and Anna. Finally, weeks later, Liam returned to school. His hair was a little longer, his frame thinner, but his eyes brighter than Laura ever remembered. She saw him in the hallway, clutching a new journal that looked fresh and unmarked. She smiled, tears pricking her eyes, and held her arms open in a cautious invitation. He walked into her hug, trembling slightly. Other students looked on, curious, but no one teased. There was an unspoken understanding that Liam had gone through something extraordinary. In the aftermath, Laura and the school district worked together to improve child safety policies. Her ordeal had sparked a flurry of concern and a renewed commitment to early intervention. Administrators and teachers attended expanded training sessions on how to detect signs of abuse, how to balance protocol with urgent moral responsibility, and how to offer better mental health support to students. News of Liam's case spread beyond Walnut Creek, prompting discussions about the flaws in the child welfare system. Some local lawmakers expressed interest in strengthening mandatory reporting laws and ensuring that teachers who acted in good faith were better protected from legal repercussions. One of the most emotional moments came when Liam agreed to speak at a small assembly in the school gym. The event had been carefully arranged with the help of his therapist and the school counselor, ensuring that Liam would feel safe. Students from multiple grades gathered, the bleachers filled with curious faces. The principal introduced Liam, and he made his way to the microphone, hands visibly shaking but eyes set with quiet determination. Laura sat among her fellow teachers, fighting the urge to rush up and stand beside him for moral support. But she knew he needed to do this on his own. Liam began by reading a passage from his new journal. His voice quavered, but it did not break. He talked about fear, about the darkness he felt when he believed no one would save him. He explained how alone he felt, how convinced he was that he deserved the abuse. Then his tone brightened as he thanked the people who intervened, Officer Daniels, the social worker, the judge, but most of all, Miss Turner. He described how, at his lowest, he clung to the hope that if just one person read his words and believed them, he might escape. It was an astounding moment of vulnerability. By the time he finished, tears glistened in many eyes around the gym. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in the rafters. Liam flushed, half smiling, half crying, and quickly left the stage. Laura found him afterward in the hallway, leaning against a locker, trying to breathe through a wave of nerves. "That was amazing," she whispered, putting a hand gently on his shoulder. "You have no idea how many people you'll help by speaking out." He looked up at her, his face filled with relief and gratitude. "Thanks, Miss Turner," he said, "for everything." They shared a moment of understanding that transcended words. Laura nodded, remembering how she had promised herself long ago that she would never again fail a child in need. In that instant, she felt a measure of healing for her old wounds as well. In the days that followed, Liam's story inspired broader reforms. Local newspapers highlighted the incident, featuring interviews with Laura and Anna. A grassroots campaign formed to strengthen support networks for children in abusive households. Volunteers set up free tutoring and counseling programs for at-risk youth. A local community center launched a hotline for students who felt unsafe at home. These changes did not happen overnight, but their foundation was laid the day Laura chose to read that journal and call 911. As the school year wound down, Laura reflected on all that had happened. She found herself simultaneously exhausted and hopeful. She had faced intense scrutiny from the district, risked her career, and dredged up painful memories of failing a former student. But she had also saved a life. And in saving that life, she had facilitated a ripple of change that might save countless more. On the final day of school, the hallways bustled with excitement. Students laughed and signed each other's yearbooks. Teachers collected final grades, stacked up textbooks, and straightened their classrooms. Laura tidied her desk, feeling a bittersweet ache. Over the summer, she would be attending workshops to refine child protection protocols. She looked forward to them, strange as it sounded. She wanted to be the best possible advocate for her students. Late that afternoon, when the building had mostly emptied, she walked around the silent corridors. She stopped at Liam's locker, where he had taped a small note of thanks to her. Though she felt intrusive reading it, her curiosity won out. "Thank you for reading my story and giving me a future. I won't forget." It was simple, but it sent a flood of warmth through her heart. She lingered a little longer, thinking of how swiftly tragedy could strike if no one paid attention. Her mind went back to the first day she realized Liam wasn't the same bright, bubbly boy she knew. She had almost convinced herself to ignore the warning signs, to chalk them up to normal preteen angst. But she didn't. She acted. And that made all the difference. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat, accompanied by the swirling music of ice cream trucks and the shrieks of children at play. As the weeks passed, Laura received updates from Anna. Liam was making progress in therapy, having fewer nightmares, and adjusting well to a new environment without Greg's looming presence. Anna was also learning to stand on her own feet, taking advantage of community resources that helped her secure independent housing. Their future was far from guaranteed or perfectly easy, but there was something intangible and vital in their lives now: hope. Toward the end of summer, Laura received an invitation to speak at a teachers' conference on the importance of early intervention in suspected abuse cases. The organizers wanted her to share her story, how she risked her career to protect a student, and how it led to broad changes in policy. She hesitated, worried she might be stepping into the spotlight in a way that felt uncomfortable or self-congratulatory. But then she remembered Liam, standing up in the gym to share his truth. If a child could muster that kind of courage, surely she could too. When the conference date arrived, she stood at a polished wooden podium in a university auditorium, facing rows of educators. She felt the usual nerves, but she steadied herself by picturing Liam's face. She spoke at length about the red flags she observed, the moral dilemmas, and the aftermath, the hearings, the trial, the wave of policy reform. More than once, she was forced to pause as her voice quavered, but the audience waited patiently. Some dabbed at their eyes, others nodded in understanding. When she finished, the applause seemed to ripple through the room with genuine appreciation. In that moment, she realized just how many teachers, counselors, and administrators had likely faced similar conflicts between policy and ethics, between fear for their careers and love for their students. She hoped her story would give them the resolve to choose bravery when it mattered. Back home, the new school year loomed. Liam had been transferred to a different district, closer to Anna's new job and their new housing arrangement. On a warm August morning, as Laura prepared for Walnut Creek Elementary's orientation, she received a text message from Anna. A picture of Liam on his first day at his new school, backpack slung over his shoulder, a tentative smile on his face. Underneath, a short message read, "He says hi and hopes your new students appreciate you as much as he does." Laura found herself smiling through tears. She showed the photo to a few of her colleagues, who responded with equally wide smiles. In the staff lounge, the environment felt different this year, more open, more conscientious. The entire staff had undergone specialized training during the break, discussing not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. "Don't be afraid to follow your instincts if a child's in danger," became something of an unofficial motto. Laura no longer felt alone in her vigilance. She sensed a collective willingness to do right by the children. As the months rolled on, the memory of Greg's trial and Liam's rescue eventually faded from the forefront of people's minds, but not from their hearts. Students came and went, parents attended conferences, the usual cycle of the academic year continued. There were times when Laura ran into roadblocks, bureaucratic red tape, disputes with parents, but she never lost sight of the big picture. She had already seen firsthand how a life could hang in the balance. With each new face that appeared in her classroom, she silently vowed, "I will see you. I will listen. I will not let you slip away into fear or despair." One rainy afternoon, while discussing a new reading list with her sixth graders, Laura found herself smiling at a small, shy girl in the front row. The girl raised her hand, her voice barely above a whisper, to ask a question about a homework assignment. The hush of the room made the child's voice carry. Laura saw fear in the girl's eyes. Maybe she was just timid, or maybe something more lurked behind that shy gaze. Either way, Laura made a mental note. Talk to her privately, see if everything's all right. That was how it had begun with Liam, after all, a flicker of concern, a question that deserved an answer. It would be a lifetime commitment, this vigilance. But Laura felt grateful for the chance to make a difference. She reflected on how close they had come to losing Liam, how easy it would have been to ignore the signs, to bury her head in the sand. A pang of sadness hit her, thinking again of Allison. But then she shook it off, telling herself that at least the guilt she once carried had been transformed into a driving force for good. Sometime later, Walnut Creek Elementary organized a community safety day. Parents, local police, social services, and teachers gathered to present information on child welfare, internet safety, and more. Laura was invited to hold a workshop on noticing the unspoken. She pulled from her own experiences, explaining how to recognize subtle changes in a student's demeanor, how to build trust, how to respond without panic but with urgency. Parents listened intently, asking her questions afterward. A father approached her, sharing concerns about his own child's withdrawn behavior. Laura offered advice and resources, grateful that people felt comfortable confiding in her. At the end of the event, as she was packing up her handouts, Officer Ben Daniels appeared by her table with a grin. "Heard you gave a great talk," he said, eyes shining with genuine admiration. Over the months of working together, they had forged a deep respect. Sometimes, he invited her to check out new community initiatives, or she invited him to speak at the school about safety protocols. They rarely referred to the grim night that cemented their alliance, but the bond remained. On that day, they chatted casually about the success of the event. The conversation drifted to Liam. "He's doing better all the time," Officer Daniels reported, as he was still involved in some capacity with the follow-up. "Therapy's going well, and Anna is working steadily. Family counseling. All that good stuff." Laura breathed a sigh of relief. "I can't tell you how happy that makes me." They parted ways with a promise to stay in touch. Laura left the school that evening beneath a sky streaked with soft hues of orange and pink. A summer-like warmth still clung to the air. She walked to her car, bag of papers slung over her shoulder, feeling a strange lightness. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the shadows of the past were no longer overshadowing her future. She had set something right. And that wasn't just about saving Liam. It was about renewing faith in herself and her ability to make a difference in this vast, complicated world. Long after the press coverage subsided and the official reforms took shape, the essence of Liam's story lived on in the hearts of those who heard it. Quiet references were made in staff meetings, reminding new teachers that a single choice, a single moment of reading a child's cry, could alter the course of a life. Students who had once been too shy or too fearful to speak up began leaving anonymous notes for counselors, trusting that help would come. Gradually, a culture of vigilance emerged, one that balanced empathy with the readiness to act. Through all of this, Laura remained the teacher she had always dreamed of being, the one who saw beyond the surface, the one who paid attention, the one who loved her students enough to risk everything when necessary. In time, the scars from her past mistakes softened, replaced by the knowledge that if she had not intervened for Liam, the world would have lost a bright, sensitive mind. Now that mind was healing, blossoming, with the potential to create a future unshackled by terror. Eventually, the seasons turned again. Autumn gave way to winter, and then spring arrived with a flourish of blossoms lining the sidewalks near Walnut Creek. On a bright Saturday morning, Laura visited a local cafe for a quiet moment of reflection. She was sipping her coffee, gazing out at the street where families strolled, children giggled, and dogs trotted happily. As she was about to leave, she noticed someone waving at her from the sidewalk. It was Anna, with Liam by her side. They were dressed in casual clothes, looking relaxed. Laura stepped outside, a grin lighting her face. Liam, a little taller now, wore a big smile. He carried a paperback book under his arm, some fantasy novel he was apparently engrossed in. Anna and Laura exchanged warm greetings. Anna mentioned they were just in town for some errands, but that Liam had insisted on stopping by the cafe when he spotted Laura inside. "Hi, Miss Turner," Liam said shyly. "I'm reading a lot these days. You used to say reading helped me expand my imagination." Laura chuckled. "Well, you always had an incredible imagination, Liam. I'm just glad you're harnessing it again." They chatted about his new school, his favorite subjects, and the short story he was writing in his fresh journal, no longer a vessel for desperate pleas, but for creative expression. Anna beamed, pride shining in her eyes. She squeezed Laura's hand and said, "I'll never be able to repay you." "You don't have to," Laura replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Seeing you both happy is more than enough." Before they parted ways, Liam extended the book he was reading toward Laura, showing her the inside cover. He had scribbled a note. "Miss Turner, thank you for reading my words when no one else would. I am safe." The heartfelt scrawl warmed Laura more than any applause or commendation ever could. She knew that, no matter how many times she told herself it was her duty, the reality was simpler. She loved her students like they were her own, and she would always do whatever it took to save them. As she watched Anna and Liam walk away down the bustling sidewalk, hand in hand, she felt a soft sense of closure. The darkest chapter of Liam's life had ended, and a new one had begun, full of promise and possibilities. And she, Laura, stood at the threshold of many more beginnings. Students would come in and out of her life, each with their own stories. Some might appear perfect on the surface, hiding their pain. Others might be outspoken, wearing their struggles openly. But she would be there for them, day after day, word by word, page by page. Sometimes, it only took one person to break the silence. One teacher to say, "I see you." One phone call to avert a tragedy. One break in the chain to stop the cycle of violence. Liam was living proof. And in his story, there was a testament to the power of resilience, a reminder that the human spirit, when nurtured with compassion and belief, could heal from even the most brutal scars. In time, the school year ended again, and a new one began, the cycle continuing like clockwork. Laura greeted each new group of sixth graders with unwavering positivity, scanning the rows of desks for any sign of hidden torment. This vigilance became second nature, a moral imperative that needed no second-guessing. She felt peace in her choice, in her identity as an educator who truly cared. And just as the final note, if you've come this far and believe that no child should be left unheard, make sure you like and subscribe for more stories where courage triumphs over silence. Thank you for watching, and never forget, the truth should always come to light.